Well, let's begin with the word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, Lord, it is a blessing to be here, and we're so thankful that you've brought us together as a people on this holy Sabbath day. Father, I pray that our hearts and minds will be focused on your message. Use my words to reach out to your people, Lord. Please use me now. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Although his father had died when he was only 13, his mother made sure that he knew the love of a parent. She adored her son and worked hard to care for him. She was always a voice of encouragement and helped him to see that despite their poverty and lack of social status, he could bring beauty and greatness into the world. It was a great blow to him when his mother died 6 years later. He knew that she wanted him to pursue his dream, so at 19, he left his boyhood home and set off to study to be an artist. However, he soon found himself homeless and living in the street with his money from an orphan's pension when it ran out. Then, when he was not accepted into the Academy of Fine Arts, his dreams were crushed and he fell into a state of depression. As he wandered the streets alone and hungry, he felt invisible to all the well-dressed and well-fed passers-by. His pleas for pity fell on unsympathetic and uncaring ears. At night, he would sleep in the archway of a storefront or on a park bench. Most mornings he would wake covered in frost and snow, with his face and lips cracked and windburned. Without even an overcoat to protect him from the cold winter winds, he feared he would freeze to death. Hopeless, helpless, and utterly alone, he resigned himself to die. But this was not to be the end. For you see, a kind old man saw him in his despair and took pity on him. Mr. Mannerheim helped the starving young man to a homeless shelter and there personally cared for him. His gnawing hunger was quieted and his shivering body was finally warmed with a hot bowl of soup. He would now get the rest he needed so badly. He finally slept on a cot in a warm room. Mr. Mannerheim gave him new clothes and befriended him. After several weeks, the young man's strength began to return. He spoke once again about his desire to be an artist. Well, Mr. Mannerheim provided him with art supplies and soon found that the young man really was quite skilled. Through his contacts with a local shop owner, he began to place the young man's artwork in the shop windows. The kindness of the old man gave him once again new life to the young man, but this was not exactly Christian kindness, for you see, Mr. Mannerheim was a Jew, and the shop owners in Vienna, Austria, were Jews also, the ones who sold his artwork. History tells us that the love that was shown to this young man would not be returned in love and gratitude, though. He closed his mind to the truth that he could not have survived without these kind people. He arrogantly claimed credit for his survival, and by deceiving himself, he became the first victim of all those who would soon fall prey to the big lie. His pride and his prejudice against them had produced a bitter hatred that would soon bring death and misery, the likes of which the world had never seen. In the young man's manifesto, Mein Kampf, he would write, "I am thankful for that period of my life because it hardened me and enabled me to be as tough as I now am. And I am even more thankful because I appreciate the fact that I was thus saved from the emptiness of a life of ease, and that a mother's darling was taken from tender arms and handed over to adversity as to a new mother. Though I then rebelled against it as a fate too hard, I am grateful that I was thrown into a world of misery and poverty and thus came to know the people whom I was afterwards to fight. This young man, who began with a dream of bringing beauty to the world, will forever be reviled as the embodiment of evil, Adolf Hitler. According to Wikipedia, the big lie technique refers to attempts by propagandists to use the frequent, emphatic repetition of a lie as a means to get people to believe it. A lie, if told often enough and shouted loudly enough, ignoring any and all statements that debunk the lie, will eventually be believed by the masses. Adolf Hitler used the big lie to depict Jews as subhuman and to blame the evils of the world upon them. Hitler's big lie led to the murder of nearly 6 million Jews and a war that would bring a worldwide death toll of between 26 and 30 million people. Today, Satan is using the big lie technique in our society, and particularly in our public schools, to destroy even more souls than Hitler. The big lie has led men to worship science instead of a savior. The big lie has led men to believe in a theory and throw out their creator. This big lie has led many of the so-called educated to say in their hearts, "There is no God." The big lie, which is taught and accepted in every public school in our country, is the theory of evolution. It is creation's counterfeit. The big lie of evolution has been told so often and so emphatically that if you reject it, society will consider you backwards and uneducated. In June of 2004, the Kansas Board of Education began a process to review and revise their state's guidelines for teaching the science of origins. The committee in charge of revising the standards decided to hold a week-long public debate to address the controversy between the two great theories of origins, evolution versus intelligent design or creationism. However, the pro-evolution forces called for a boycott of the hearings. The CEO of the American Association for the Advancement of Science stated, "AAAS respectfully declines to participate in these meetings. The concept of evolution is well supported by extensive evidence and accepted by virtually every scientist." Instead of taking the opportunity to present their evidence and to show why their theory was just so untouchable, they gave a childish response. "Evolution is true and everybody knows it. So there." Well, I threw in the "so there" part, but not a single evolutionist agreed to testify at these hearings. They would not use science and data to defeat the creationists. No, their strategy was much darker, much more sinister. As stated by a public relations representative for the Kansas Citizens for Science organization, quote, "My strategy at this point is the same as it was in 1999. Notify the national and local media about what's going on and portray the creationists in the harshest light possible as political opportunists, evangelical activists, ignoramuses, breakers of rules, unprincipled bullies. There may be no way to head off another science standards debacle, but we can make sure to make them look like asses as they do. Our target is the moderates who are not that well educated about the issues." End quote. Not that well educated. Well, how educated are you? How ready are you to give an answer for why you believe in creationism? Are you ready to speak boldly to defend your beliefs? 1 Peter 3:15 says, "Sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you a reason of the hope that is in you." This morning, Becky and Sarah read the three angels' messages from the book of Revelation. This is God's last day warning message. It says, I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the spring of water. Is it any wonder that God placed virtually the same exact language in the heart of his 10 Commandments? Written in stone with his own finger, he says, Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. And he rested the seventh day. Brothers and sisters, God has given us a message to the world. He tells us to bring the knowledge back of a loving Creator. But Satan is doing everything in his power to turn people away from the Creator and his memorial of creation, the Sabbath. If we are to fulfill the mission that God has given us, we must be able to present logical, educated reasons for why we don't accept the theory of evolution. Friends, I say to you that we must be ready always to give an answer for our faith. Most people in this world disagree with our beliefs, but you need to help them see that God is real. God is the Creator, and evolution is a lie. This morning I want to give you 4 reasons for why evolution is a bankrupt theory that scientifically just does not hold water. To help you remember them, I've arranged these reasons into an acronym, the word FACE, F-A-C-E. The first letter, F, stands for fossils. As you will see, the fossil record is one of the strongest arguments against evolution. Point number 1, the sudden appearance of life. One of the lower rock layers in the Earth's crust has been named the Cambrian layer. It is this layer where they have found literally billions of fossils. Yet in the layers below this, not a single fossil has ever been found. Not one. It's almost as if life just suddenly burst into the world. Evolutionists would tell us that life evolved slowly over a period of millions and millions of years. If this were true, we would not find a sudden burst of diverse, fully formed, fossilized plants and animals, but instead we would find a gradual increase as you progress up through the layers of the Earth's crust. Charles Darwin himself said, To the question why we do not find rich fossiliferous deposits prior to the Cambrian system, I can give no satisfactory answer. The fossil evidence supports creationism, not evolution. Point number 2, the missing link is still missing. You see, the very essence of evolutionary theory is based on progressive change. Evolution teaches that all life began in an ancient pool of chemicals, and perhaps lightning struck this pool, and these chemicals somehow or another reacted to form the first living cell. From there, that cell split and developed and branched off to eventually form all the forms of life that we see today, trees and flowers and fish and birds and chimpanzees and humans. This is called the theory of universal common descent. So according to this theory, the fossil record should show a continuous array of living forms from that first single-celled amoeba all the way up to man. There would be no missing links between any life forms, and everything would just be a gradual blending of different creatures. There would be no unique separate species. there would be nothing but weird mixes of all sorts of plants and animals. Darwin admits to this problem in the fossil record when he says, "Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely gradiated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against the theory." That's Darwin himself saying that. Researchers, they just haven't had bad luck in finding the missing link between man and apes. They can't find missing links between anything. Austin H. Clark, a famous biologist on the staff of the Smithsonian Institute, states, quote, "Since we have not the slightest evidence, either among the living or the fossil animals, of any integrating type, it is a fair supposition that there never have been any such integrating types." If there have never been any of these links, then obviously the theory of evolution cannot be true. Evolution is a lie. Point number 3 is reasoning in a circle. In order for this evolutionary process to have occurred, scientists tell us that it would take millions and millions of years. They realize that the odds of achieving the complexity that we see is so low that it would just take eons of time for a random process to stumble upon this trial and error. Imagine how long it would take if I gave you a quarter and I said, flip the coin and you can't stop until you get 100 times in a row of getting heads. That would take a while. It has been estimated that the odds of a pool of non-living chemicals forming into a single-celled organism is 10 to the 21st power. So imagine how long it would take for you to flip a quarter and get heads for 1 to the 21st power times in a row. If I were you, I would get a 2-headed quarter. All right? That's why evolutionists say that the fossils found in these rock layers must be millions of years old. But let me ask you a question. How is the age of a rock layer determined? Professor Henry Shaler Williams of Yale University tells us. He says, "The character of the rocks themselves, their composition or their mineral contents, have nothing to do with the settling of the question as to the particular system or age level to which the rocks belong. The fossils alone are the means of correlation." So, in other words, the age of the rock is based on the age of the fossils that are found in the rock, okay? So how do they determine the age of the fossils? Are you ready for this jewel of wisdom? The age of the fossil is based on the age of the rock it is found in. So that's no joke. If an evolutionist finds a dinosaur bone, he will announce that it is 70 million years old because of the rock that it was found in. But how does he know that the rock was 70 million years old? Well, it's because it had a dinosaur bone in it, of course. Evolutionists chase their own tails in this circular reasoning, and then they emphatically say that evolution is science. Evolution is not science. Evolution is a lie. The second letter in our FACE acronym is A, and it stands for apes. Did man come from God or a gorilla? From Adam or from apes? Let's take a look at several of the bones of contention. See what I did there? Anyway. First up, Neanderthal man. In 1856, portions of a skeleton were dug out of a cave in the Neander Valley near Dusseldorf, Germany. These 14 pieces of bones and a skull cap were declared to be the missing link. With this in mind, evolutionary scientists depicted Neanderthal man as this squat, stooping, ape-like creature. It was eventually determined that this one specimen suffered from curvature of the spine, and later Neanderthal discoveries brought forth skeletons that stood perfectly upright. According to two well-known anatomists, they said, quote, "If he could be reincarnated and placed in a New York subway, provided that he were bathed, shaved, and dressed in modern clothing, it is doubtful whether he would attract any attention at all." Then there was Cro-Magnon man. The Cro-Magnon race was known to have been superior to modern man in both physical size and brain capacity. His cranial capacity was 1,660 cc's. Neanderthal man had a cranial capacity of about 1,600 cc's, and modern man has a brain capacity of only about 1,500 cc's. As Science Digest puts it, since the Cro-Magnon man, the human brain has been decreasing in size. This indicates degeneration, not evolution. In fact, it can be argued that modern man may be a deteriorated descendant of these ancestors. A few years ago, I went to a seminar in which the head of the New Jersey Orthodontic Society spoke. As part of a study team, he had been allowed access to a very famous skull that appeared on the cover of the National Geographic magazine. You may have seen the picture. It was had a large head with a protruding brow and this extended jaw. It really does look kind of ape-like. Well, upon examination, he found that the skull appeared to have been pieced together in a very curious manner. In reality, the extended ape-like jaw was not extended at all. The museum curators had put mortar into the actual jaw sockets and had pulled the jaw out themselves. He said that the jaw physically could not function in the position that they had displayed it. They clearly wanted people to think of this as an ape man. He also showed us something else that I thought was just awesome. He explained how orthodontists must understand the structure of the human skull as it ages, as a person ages. Measurements from thousands of patients from all different ages had been captured and then entered into a database. The computer could then use these measurements and visually demonstrate how a human skull changes from a child through middle age to elder years, all the way up to 100 years old that they had some measurements from. But he didn't stop there. He used the computer to plot out the changes as if the person perhaps had lived to be 150 years old, 200 years old. Now this is the cool part. He found that the reference points on the supposed ape-man skull that he had examined exactly matched the structure of someone as if they had lived to between 350 to 400 years old. You know, I remember reading something in the Bible about people living hundreds of years old. It's pretty interesting, huh? Let me give you one more ape man. He was called Nebraska Man. In 1922, Harold Cook found a single molar tooth in Nebraska. Eager to discover the missing link, famous paleontologist Henry Fairfield Osborn, director of the American Museum of Natural History in New York, declared this to be either an ape-like man or perhaps a man-like ape. A full picture of Nebraska Man was even reconstructed showing ape-like features, all from just finding a single tooth. In 1925, this tooth was introduced as evidence of evolution into the famous Scopes monkey trials in Tennessee. But 2 years later, Nebraska's man came to an abrupt halt. It turned out that he was not a man. He was not even an ape. You see, the tooth actually came from a pig. The newspaper reports said, quote, "This was a case in which a pig made a monkey out of an evolutionist. Evolution is a lie. Amen? The third letter of our FACE acronym, C, stands for causes. What could possibly cause evolution to occur? In Genesis 1:24, we find the account of the 6th day of creation week. Genesis 1:24, it says, "And God said, Let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and every living thing, everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good." Do you know what God means when he says, after his kind? He is saying that dogs will stay dogs, and apes will stay apes, and humans will stay humans. God is saying that each species is separate and unique, and it does not evolve into other species. Now, I want to make a distinction between microevolution and macroevolution. You see, microevolution refers to the changes that do occur over time in a species. Changes will occur from generation to generation, but each succeeding generation still belongs to the same species as its ancestors. Through breeding, we can produce big dogs and short dogs and fuzzy dogs and hairless dogs, but they're all still dogs. We can see how a child is not an exact duplicate of its parents, but he is still human. Now, I'm not quite sure about what species teenagers are, but thankfully most of them also eventually turn back into humans. Right, Sarah? Now, macroevolution is macroevolution is this idea that one species will eventually evolve into a different, and in their point of view, a higher level species. But the evolutionists must explain what could possibly cause this to happen. First of all, let me state that what I'm asking is purely hypothetical, because as Thomas Hunt Morgan, professor at both Columbia and Caltech states, quote, "Within the period of human history, we do not know of a single instance of the transmutation of one species into another one." So asking what could cause this evolutionary change is like asking and reading the nursery rhyme and asking what could possibly cause that cow to jump over the moon. Like macroevolution, this is something which has never happened. You know, it seems like evolution and fairy tales have a lot in common. But anyway, evolutionists can offer only 3 possible methods which could cause this transmutation to occur. Method number 1 is called Lamarckism. Lamarckism is the theory that characteristics acquired by an organism during its lifetime can be transmitted to its offspring. For example, Lamarckism would say that the giraffes developed really long necks because they stretched so much. And because all of this stretching made them have offsprings with longer and longer necks. However, Lamarckism has been shown and tested to be false. The most notable experiment to disprove this theory involved cutting off the tails of mice for successive generations. No matter how well those mice learned to function without a tail, the baby mice were always born with tails as long as ever. Lamarckism is not the answer. Method number 2 is hybridization. Hybridization is simply the crossing of 2 organisms diverse enough to produce a different variety of something. For instance, farmers have succeeded in raising high-yield hybrid corn. But no matter what is done to that corn, it always stayed corn. Also, the offspring of hybrids are often sterile and require constant rehybridization. They don't go on to form a new species. A horse may mate with a donkey to produce a mule, but mules are always sterile. Professor Richard B. Goldschmidt says, nowhere have the limits of the species been transgressed, and these limits are separated from the limits of the next good species by the unbridged gap, which is sterility. Hybridization is not the answer. And that leaves method number 3, mutations. Mutations are caused by changes in the genes themselves. Thomas Hunt Morgan and his colleagues at Columbia University subjected the common fruit fly to genetic experiments for more than 1,000 generations. They chose fruit flies because a fruit fly goes through 26 generations in a year. By using X-ray radiation, they succeeded in causing mutations. The eyes changed colors, and the wings, they changed this way and that, and the number of hair bristles changed. But the mutant flies that did survive this radiation were still all fruit flies. They never changed into a mosquito or a ladybug or anything else. You know, science is defined as, quote, knowledge or a system of knowledge covering general truths or the operation of general laws, especially as obtained and tested through the scientific method. Reproducibility is one of the main principles of the scientific method. You see, a scientist will use observation, hypothesis, and deductions to produce a theory. Once the scientist conducts experiments on this theory, if the results are not expected or if the results cannot be reproduced, then the theory should be discarded as false. Not only can the theory of evolution not be reproduced, the evolutionists can't even come up with a single method which could have caused evolution to ever occur. Simply put, evolution is not science. Evolution is a lie. Finally, we have E, which stands for entropy. In nature, there are certain occurrences which are so constant and so universal that they have come to be known as laws. For example, there's the law of gravity, there's the law of aerodynamics, and there's the second law of thermodynamics, which is known as entropy. Entropy is the measure of loss of order. For example, when a well-tended garden is no longer cared for, weeds will come in and a state of chaos will take over the garden. When an old car is towed to a junkyard, it will rust and deteriorate and eventually turn back into dust. If a mom does not step in, a boy's bedroom will descend into a scene of chaos with a horrific smell. This breakdown from order to disorder, that's the law of entropy. If evolution were true, it would violate the law of entropy. Evolution depends on systems becoming more complex and more orderly. It says that life started as a single-cell organism, and that developed into a tadpole, and then into a small land animal, and then up through monkeys, and eventually into these beings that are so incredibly complex that we can't even begin to fully understand them. And I'm talking about women, of course, but no. The law of entropy does not support evolution. Right, Carol? The law of entropy supports de-evolution. It states that without the intervention of an outside force, a complex system will break down and eventually reach a state of chaos. In the beginning, God created two perfect people and put them into a perfect, orderly garden. When sin entered, God partially removed his intervention and entropy took over, and we have devolved ever since. In the book Spiritual Gifts, Ellen White says, "As Adam came forth from the hand of his Creator, he was of noble height and of beautiful symmetry. He was more than twice as tall as men now living upon the earth, and was well proportioned." I'm 6'4". Could you imagine seeing Adam being twice as tall as me? In The Great Controversy, she describes the resurrection, saying, "All come forth from their graves in the same stature as when they entered the tomb. Adam, who stands among the risen throng, is of lofty height and majestic form, in stature but a little below the Son of God. He presents a marked contrast to the people of later generations. In this one respect is shown the great degeneracy of the race." But she goes on with this wonderful scene, this wonderful news. She says, "Restored to the tree of life in the long-lost Eden, the redeemed will grow up to the full stature of the race in its primeval glory. The last lingering traces of the curse of sin will be removed, and Christ's faithful ones will appear in the beauty of the Lord, in mind and soul and body, reflecting the perfect image of their Lord." Brothers and sisters, we are devolving. We are not evolving. But one day soon, Jesus will return to this earth, and he will put an end to all of this chaos. Satan lied to Eve when he said that she would evolve to unimaginable wisdom if she would just disobey God and eat the fruit. This was a lie, and so is evolution. This morning, we've examined the ugly face of evolution. We saw how the fossil evidence actually supports creationism, not evolution. We looked at the history of the phony ape man controversies. We investigated the possible, or more correctly, impossible causes of evolution. And finally, we considered the law of entropy. For thousands of years, mankind was firmly grounded in the belief that God created all things. The book by Charles Darwin that presented the theory of evolution was titled On the Origin of Species. It was published in 1859. I believe the timing of the appearance of this counterfeit theory was not an accident. You see, when God works to bless his people, Satan steps in to present his counterfeit. The fourth commandment says to remember the seventh-day Sabbath as a memorial to honor God's act of creation. For centuries, man had forgotten the seventh-day Sabbath. Then, in the 1840s, there began to be a great reawakening. In various parts of the world, men and women studied their Bibles, and they rediscovered this truth that had been forgotten. Once again, people began to keep the Sabbath and honor the Creator as it was commanded. It's no coincidence that Satan presented his counterfeit soon thereafter. If people could be led to reject the creation, then they would have no reason to honor the Creator by keeping the Sabbath. Satan is so intent on sweeping away God's law by indoctrinating the youth in our country with the lie of evolution, that the mere discussion of any other theory is just viciously attacked. The Kansas Board of Education, after listening to days of testimony from 17 PhDs in various fields of science, as they clearly explained the flaws of evolution, they then passed a resolution saying that the pros and the cons of both intelligent design and evolution should be taught in the Kansas public schools. But a year later, after this terrible political campaign, 4 of the 6 members were just completely reviled, and these 4 of the 6 members of the Board of Education were voted out. And soon thereafter, the new board reversed the decision so that only evolution could be taught, and only the points favoring evolution. Any evidence which could weaken the children's belief in evolution would not be tolerated. God calls upon us to proclaim the truth that He is the Creator, and His truth will prevail. From the book Patriarchs and Prophets we read, "Here is clearly set forth the origin of the human race. God created man in His own image. There is no ground for the supposition that man was evolved by slow degrees of development from the lower forms of animal or vegetable life. He who set the starry worlds on high, who filled the earth and the heavens with the wonders of His power, did not fail to create a being worthy of the hand that gave him life. The geology of our race traces back its origin not to a line of developing germs, mollusks, and quadrupeds, but to the great Creator God. Though formed from the dust, Adam was the Son of God." One last story. As Abraham Lincoln was leaving church one day, he was asked what he thought about the sermon. He said, "Well, the pastor was a fine preacher. He had a good, strong voice, and he was an excellent speaker. But he forgot one thing. He forgot to ask us to do something great." Friends, this morning, I'm going to ask you to do something great. I want you to boldly talk to your children and grandchildren about evolution, and lift up creationism. Show why you believe what you believe. According to a report from the Pew Research Center, 44% of 18 to 29-year-olds have no religious affiliation. And 60% of those who have left the Christian church stated that their reason for leaving it is that they, quote, "question a lot of religious teachings that appear to fly in the face of scientific research, especially with regard to evolutionary theory and climate change." This morning, we've covered just a few of the solidly scientific reasons against evolution, but there are many, many more. There are great resources that you can use. I advise you to look up, there's an app called Genesis Apologetics. Great information on there. There are wonderful movies that are available for streaming. For example, there's a movie called Evolution's Achilles Heel. There's a movie called Is Genesis History? And there's even a video of the Kansas Board of Education debates called Evolution on Trial. All excellent resources. Educate yourself. You need to be able to speak with confidence. We must tell our children and show them that they are sons and daughters of God, not ancestors of apes. Be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you for a reason of the hope that is in you. God created this world. God was crucified in this world. And one day, friends, God will come again to this world.